Welcome to Tell Me More, the Allsteel podcast where design meets innovation and we explore the limitless potential of workspaces. In this exclusive series, we're peeling back the layers of workplace design. From the psychology of colors to the future of hybrid work, join us as we open doors to conversations with industry leaders, architects, and designers who redefine the modern workplace. This is Tell Me More, brought to you by Allsteel, because when it comes to designing the future, there's always more to discover.
Hello and welcome to the Tell Me More podcast. I'm Rikki, Crowe, Senior Workplace Advisor at Allsteel. Today I'm going to be joined by Madison and Dima, and we're going to kind of continue our conversation around living in beta. It's really this idea that with thoughtful consideration and planning, we can create workplace systems that support the work of today, as well as anticipating the work of tomorrow. We'll primarily be discussing how we leverage demountable walls to achieve those goals. So I'm going to kick it over to Dima to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Dima Daimi-Lewis. I am an interior architect. I've been doing this for about 15 years. I have clients that range from, smaller groups to large clients like Ford, Mercedes-Benz, Quicken Loans, Domino's, you name it. And workplace design has just always fascinated me. Well, before I even started working, my thesis at school was on workplace design, how we can make our lives better. I started Provoke Design about 3 years ago. One of my strong design ideologies is that design should make you feel something. So when you come into a space that I've designed, I have failed if you're not immediately wanting to pull out your phone to share it or touch the building or have an experience or feel something where hopefully it's eliciting joy or whatever our design objective was to get you there, right? My goal is to create holistic environments that activate the human condition. So that's where I'm at, awesome. And I'm happy to be here.
Well, welcome. And then Miss Madison.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Madison Gentry. I am the Sales Enablement Manager for Architectural Products here at Allsteel. I've been working with commercial furniture for about 6 years now, coming from the residential design industry. And I am relatively new to architectural products, coming up on a year now. But what being in this position has taught me, especially in the last couple of years, is that having interiors that can adapt to the work that we do, rather than having to adapt our work to the interiors, is incredibly important. And demountable walls is one facet of that, but it's an important facet of that. So as we continue on in this discussion today, I'm really excited to highlight the various impacts and positive impacts that demountable walls can have on our industry, but also just on the individual user, which is ultimately our main goal and objective, is to make the experience for the individual user the best that it can be. And to Dima's point, having holistic interiors that suit us in many different ways, this is one way that we can do it. It's an important way. They all work together to create an ecosystem that is positive for everybody. So I'm really excited about this discussion today.
I was going to say, I'm pretty excited that apparently I'm talking to two other workplace nerds out there. So
big nerds.
It's going to be fun, right? So let's just get right in it, right? So I'm going to start with you, Dima. Why demountable walls? Why do you like working with them? What do you think's great about them, et cetera?
Honestly, I think why not demountable walls? I think as an interior architect, they just make my job so much easier. I'll go from the very boring end of just from a design standpoint, we have to design every single detail. We have to select every single thing. We have to then detail everything. Demountable walls make it where from our construction documents, we're able to save a lot of time because we're able to dash them in, say by others. And then we're able to, after CDs are issued, work with the furniture dealer to get into the weeds of, okay, I need it to open and close like this, or we're able to just kind of have a conversation with the dealer on this is what I need to work. And then they're the ones developing those more detailed drawings for all of those parts and pieces. So I think from an architectural standpoint, it just makes my job so much easier. From a design standpoint, I also feel like it allows me to create maybe even more complex designs. A couple of years ago, or you could argue even still now, people were doing like more of the heavy mullions and kind of warehouse looking stuff, especially being in the Midwest and working in the Detroit area. And when you go to price something like that in a more storefront style, like stick built kind of construction, it kind of comes in through the roof, while demountables are like, oh, we just use double-sided tape and do these specialty mullions and you get the look, but you don't have to pay for it. And that's all our clients are looking for, is the look. They're not, they don't need cast iron warehouse style windows. So I think, from a design standpoint, it's absolutely great in what we can do. From a documentation standpoint, it's super easy. And then for my clients, I think oftentimes, especially with budgets being so heavy and tax benefits and just putting this component in a different budget, it's really silly sometimes. It works for them to have this line item be this and this line item be that. And then ultimately, I think the future flexibility, definitely in the larger clients, I've seen it where they're modifying so much because their growth changes so much. But I think also with where we're at today and just leases not being that long and you can kind of take it with you when you go. And then also just, workplace is changing a lot. I think COVID really was like, oh, private offices, oh, open, oh, not, what are we doing? So it just gives you that ability to not have to do a full build out to make a couple modifications, which I think is also helpful for those clients seeking that.
Totally. Madison, I'll ask you the same question, although I probably know your answer, but why demountable?
Same thing. Why not demountable walls? But from my perspective, all of the same reasons that Dima highlighted. I think demountable walls allows us to create complex designs without blowing the budget out of the water. And so when we're able to respond to change quickly, and not only just quick changes of, I need an additional outlet here, I need to make drastic floor plate changes, it allows us to make changes really quickly. But more importantly, or equally importantly, is the projects that I've had worked on that are the most positive in terms of impact to the end user, but also just had the best process throughout from start to finish, are the projects where there is a group that is collaborating together. And demountable walls allows the architect, the developer, the furniture manufacturer, everybody to come to the same table and say, let's work together to create a floor plate that is an ecosystem that works for everybody within that space, but also works for the long term. So it allows us to make those easy changes. And those projects are the most impactful because you have so many knowledgeable voices in the room creating a cohesive solution for one reason, but that can also serve many reasons down the road. So demountable walls, of course, I think it's to your point, Dima, the tax incentives that are behind it is wonderful. The ability to change is wonderful. The little impact to the building shell is also great. But all of this comes back to the same point of demountable walls allow us to be more flexible. And considering nowadays that the workplace is changing so much, like we've talked about, we need to be able to be more flexible. And so our furniture, as well as the building system itself, should adapt to allow for that.
Yeah. It's one of those things too, and I know, Madison, you've heard me talk about this, but I've really been trying to push designers and clients to kind of think of demountable walls not just as a way to create enclosed spaces, but also kind of semi-enclosed and kind of these paths. Because I think part of what you do, Dima, as a designer is that you're trying to create these really dynamic spaces, right? So having a system that you can leverage, that it doesn't have to have a door on it. It could just be this little nook. Because I always like to talk about how people love our little caves. We like our little shroud, our little thing. But sometimes it's nice to feel like I can just pop in and out of a space. So cool. Yeah, I think we're all down for demountable walls, right?
I like that cave analogy, actually. I think that's a good way of describing it.
Yeah, we've been playing around with these concepts caves and commons kind of area, this push and pull through the space. And I've always enjoyed leveraging our demountable walls just from that standpoint, because it does allow us to kind of weave people through the space versus just being core and around, right? Not that those don't also have beautiful spaces, but I just really love this idea of being able to kind of pop into nooks and crannies throughout the area. So
and I think your point, sorry, Rikki, I think your point about being able to create more than just a room, not just four walls, we're creating neighborhoods, we're creating zoning within the floor plate. And if we have this discussion about bringing people into a space that they enjoy working and being a part of. It's that they also have to have some autonomy over that space and feel like it's something of theirs that they can kind of own with them and their team. Demountable walls allow us to do that without rigid construction. So we can create the conference room. That's wonderful. We can create the partially open spaces, such as like a design library or an informal lounge setting that we can have a quick touchdown. But it also allows us to create, just a straight run of walls that maybe serve as signage or wayfinding, or just block a space from a collaborative area to a touchdown area without having a harsh threshold on it. I think this again allows us to have not only flexibility within the construction process, but flexibility within the planning. And it opens it up for designers like Dima to have many more complex and robust design solutions that can fit multiple different work styles and postures, rather than more of the rigid work of at your desk or in a conference room that we're kind of used to.
Yeah. I like, Dima, that you brought up the mullion kind of idea, because I think that that's one of the things that designers don't necessarily always think about with demountable walls. They just think of like the solid wall or just the glass wall, but kind of leveraging that in what I'll call non-traditional ways, potentially, what things that you would have had built out by somebody else and installed, and it's this fixed element that is always there. The mixed materiality that I feel like you can start to do with demountables does let you get those really that texturalness. I know I've seen that in a lot of the designs I've saw of the imagery of your work. Instead of it just being drywall or glass, it's like you can get that applied mullion or veneer or paint, etc. So I think it's cool to see how designers start to use those things a little bit differently.
I think it's also really important to talk about, I always say it makes my job easier. But, making my job easier isn't like, my design can be great, but it's all depends on how it's executed, right? And I think when you rely on demountables because of the, I know Allsteel is going to deliver X, Y, and Z, and I know the dealer will deliver X, Y, and Z. It's kind of like a locked in delivery that you can trust, as opposed to, you don't always know where the project's going to be bid out to, which contractor is going to get it, how they priced it, how they interpreted your drawings, right? And I think, when we talk about, whether it's the mullions or, you talked about creating kind of a transparency or different types of, space compared to standard construction methods. I look at oftentimes like we're looking at like clear stories or different ways of manipulating natural light coming through, or different ways of, you talked about caves, and I think that's so cool because it's so important to talk about like the human condition. I always talk to clients about like, sometimes you're just not having the best day and you're not trying to sit at your desk and you just need to like go hibernate. And, I'm going to use that cave thing all the time because that's so true, because we sometimes just need to go hide, and it doesn't impact who we are as an employee. It doesn't impact who we are as, architect or designer or whatever our role is, and, that we're playing that day. It just, the environment needs to support us as people when we're coming in. And I think demountables have that ability to create almost like different, I call it like lace, or trying to put a word to it, like transparencies that, I almost associate with like tree canopies and how we feel when we're sitting under a tree or something. Like, so we're able to create not just a solid wall or just a glass wall. We're able to create, an environment that stretches across, a landscape of a workplace from how it makes people feel.
By the way, if anybody's listening to this and can't tell that we're total workplace nerds, I can't.
Geek.
No shame in
Total
this game.
geeks. It's totally fun. No, but we're all just like, yes, yes, yes. But yeah, so I'm going to not completely switch the conversation, but kind of build off of that, because we have been talking about being able to kind of like make some of those changes over time, being able, whether they're large or small. And I know we had a quick conversation, Dima, in which you were talking about the importance of aligning architectural to support that wall movement. So do you want to share some kind of like best practices or things to look out for when you are trying to plan for that?
I think there's a couple ways you can look at demountables, and I do different projects. Sometimes I just look at them as like, okay, my storefronts or all my glazing is going to be a demountable, and for the reasons I mentioned, because it's easy and it's wonderful. They have great STC ratings, they're measured, blah, blah, blah. Then there's other manners in like, we know that the client is going to be moving a lot. We know that their current growth based on future growth, based on how they already operate their facility. I worked on a large automotive insurance company in Michigan that essentially their facilities person was like, we move constantly, we're rebuilding things constantly, we're changing offices and groups and all that stuff around. So the way we laid out the architectural components as it related to workplace was we designed a continuous ceiling plane. So it is easy to, move the walls around. I think so often people will be like, oh, well, this ceiling's 10 feet, this ceiling's 9 feet, this ceiling's 8 feet. And you kind of create, and in some instances, it's great to create this, sculptural type of environment. But in, the use of our client needing full flexibility, I think that's one thing to maintain is a continuous ceiling plane. So that way the pieces that they're purchasing are all at 9 feet or all at 8 feet or whatever that dimension is 10 feet. And can be moved around from floor 2 to floor 3 to floor 5 very easily because of the continuous heights. I think that's something people don't realize with demountables. If you purchase 9'6" and you're trying to put it in a 10 or 9 foot space, yeah, sure, we can cut it down or, oh, we can do this, but it doesn't really work out as well to your advantage financially of reusing and relocating. And then I think in part also is designing the ceiling and the light fixtures, because lighting is so important in, these spaces to be able to be moved around or modified easily. So, in spaces where the client is asking for ultimate flexibility, I don't do drop ceilings plus open ceilings plus continuous light fixtures plus, pendants or something. We work and look at maybe more modular type spaces and more modular type ceilings or modular light fixtures.
Yeah.
She touched on a lot of the points that we coach on projects too. And it comes down to, if we're going to go with a demountable wall solution for the intention of that it's going to flex as we flex, that we need to have these conversations much earlier in the process. We need to be involved with, the architects, the designers, and sometimes even the commercial real estate developers to make sure that everybody's aligned on this overall strategy so that every system works together. Again, we're creating an ecosystem on the floor plate, so every piece needs to cater to the other pieces within the space. So if we know we're going to use demountable walls, we do need to think through the HVAC, the lighting, the electrical, all of these systems to make sure that, okay, if we move this room around or we split this room and we create two, do we still have building systems in place that don't require ideally any rework or just minimal rework in order to still have the proper systems in each space? So the earlier we can have these conversations, the better. And, this is an area where, again, having all parties at the table, from design to commercial manufacturing, furniture manufacturing, to the developer, if they need to be involved, that's when we can have the most impactful conversation right up front.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, it's interesting, Dima, when you talk about that too, right? Like, as a designer, being able to look at the floor plate or the workplace and kind of understand where are you going to have those moments where maybe you do want that bigger ceiling or you want to have that moment, but it's probably not going to be really a place where you're putting workstations or you're putting offices, right? It's probably going to be a cafe or a gathering area or something like that, reception, etc. So it's not like any of us are here saying oh, it should just be ACT across your entire floor plate. Mm-hmm. It's just really about being a little bit more thoughtful, right? About what you're doing with your ceiling so that you can get that flexibility. So I want to know, are you seeing any kind of construction trends related to walls per se?
I think I mentioned earlier about the clear story, the transparency, stuff like that. One of the things I'm also noticing is color. I think that, it was all silver, then it was all black. And I actually am starting to think and see that maybe white is the right, is the new, trending mullion choice. Don't quote me or quote me maybe. I feel or even just, you'll see the blending of do we do navy? Do we do all these different colors? And I think with demountables, it's easier to get clients on board to, experiment with color as opposed to the traditional black, silver, whatever. because they're able to be like, oh, well, it's kind of temporary. It's already like in their head as like a temporary furniture component in their mind kind of thing. So they're able to experiment a little bit more. But I also think the color thing is a big thing. And I think the reason why demountables are so cool with that is if you go to like a traditional like storefront, even back when we were switching from silver to black, right? Oh, I can do black, but it's an upcharge. Why is it an upcharge? Like it's this, you're painting. What are your painting costs? So I think that's one of the things where like the experimentation with colors and frame colors, is definitely something that's coming around. And then the other thing I just think is that traditional wall construction can't do is, different zones, whether it's like glazing at the top or the bottom or side lights or stuff like that. When you try to detail something like that for traditional construction, I think the contractors are definitely like, okay, well, let's charge 5 times as much because look at how complicated this is. She's not just doing standard drywall, metal frame to sheets of drywall, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of some of the things I'm noticing as it relates to wall trends specifically.
Cool.
Well, I think you're bringing up a great point too when you touch on finishes and that demountables can flex a bit more when it comes to finishes. And it goes into, what, finish are field applied mullions. But even if you had a solid wall, even down to your solid tiles, that if you had veneer on them and for whatever reason you don't want veneer solid tiles anymore, maybe you want to switch to a laminate or a flat painted color, without having to replace the entire wall, without having to bring in the painter, the electrician, the dry, all of these people in order to accommodate that change. If we're talking about conventional construction, we simply just have to order new tiles. And then those solid tiles on site get popped off and the new ones get popped on, and it's incredibly easy. It doesn't create dust and debris within the workplace. It doesn't create a major scheduling hassle. We don't have to move people out of that space in order to make the change. It allows us to flex a lot faster and easier. So demountable walls truly does just come down to it's these minor changes that we're talking about, but it can also flex with the larger changes as well.
Totally agree.
We've touched on this a bit, but the range of change that we're able to accommodate within a demountable wall solution is great. But I want to also highlight the fact that it's wonderful for the end user. There's tax incentives for the end user. It allows them to be flexible, but it really does have benefits to all parties within the process. To Dima's point, it helps with her planning. It allows her to be more, flexible with her designs over time, but also it can have positive impacts for other individuals that are a part of the process too. If we think through the end user, we've allowed for change within them, but say they move out of a space and the developer is the one that actually purchased the demountable walls. Well, then that developer has a solution within the space that allows to flex for a new tenant that comes into the space. So it isn't just about the end user. It really satisfies all parties within that process and allows all parties to be able to change. So I think oftentimes demountable walls, we think through, the client, it's going to be able to flex for them. It does, but it flexes for everybody else too and allows for their planning and process to be easier as well.
I think that's definitely a great point. And I wonder if this is a separate podcast topic, but something that I don't think we've really talked about is demountable walls for developers and what that does. It's no surprise right now. We have endless square footage of unused office space right now in the commercial office market. And essentially what I'm finding, and there's been a couple projects where clients, come to me and what would traditionally have been a full office tenant lease, for a floor, we're not getting that as much anymore. And you can see that by tracking, any of the real estate, leasing things, whether it's it being issued in Cranes or some other areas. And so what we've done is we've gone in and created smaller suites and kind of created a shared amenity of a kitchen or something, and people are more willing to do these smaller suites. However, where I think there's opportunity to do that in demountables is that it's inevitable, and actually what we did for a client 3 years ago, someone wants to come in and take 2 joint suites, so they need to rip out a wall. anytime you ask a contractor to come in and price something, then you got to get electrical involved. You got to get all these different trades involved, and we got to rework this. It just becomes so much more expensive compared to if it was a demountable wall. That developer is able to, one, have a big write-off, which what developer doesn't love a write-off? Let's be real here. Have a big write-off on their, initial savings, but also be able to modify something within a week or two and be able to lease the product without any dust, without any disruption, without any sound to all of the other tenants involved. And I just think, when we're looking at workplace leasing and stuff, it's very much smaller square footage. We looked at, part of post-COVID was a reduction in square footage holistically for most businesses that are even requiring partial or back to work. And so I think that's actually a huge component of, why demountables and spaces like that.
Fantastic. I'm really thankful for this conversation, you guys. I think so many times when we talk about our client, we're thinking of just the end user, the people that are actually going to be occupying the space. I'm so thankful that this conversation kind of expanded to, at least from an Allsteel perspective, all of our clients, the fact that we are creating something that makes your life easier and that you can expect, what you're going to get kind of a thing, I think is really great. So thank you so much. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Can't stop talking about demountables.
No,
so much fun.
Totally.
I think one more thing that I think is actually really huge, and I think so often when we're doing these initial pricing, we're like, oh, demountable is more expensive and there's a cost fear associated with it. I recently had a project that I worked on with my client was a general contractor. So if there's anyone that can build something for cheaper or better or easier, would be a general contractor, right? Especially in their own office where they can modify things, or, you're always able to do it for yourself for less, right? They actually priced, we had a whole bunch of walls. They had a lot of private offices in their space, where they priced all of it in demountable, and they priced it against their traditional construction costs. And mind you, this is getting the best numbers on their end because they're the GC, right? So all of their guys are giving them the best, all their subs are giving them the best numbers. And the demountables were more cost effective. And not only are they more cost effective, I think something that we forget about is clients, as much as we can walk them through the whole process in the beginning and wall by wall, and would you like an outlet here? And would you, go through all of it, and the light switches here and blah, blah, blah. Once they get in the space, they change their mind. Or, oh, can we add this? How many walkthroughs have we had where it's all that? Adding an outlet in construction, maybe prior to construction, is like $150, $300, maybe even less than that when they're doing a bulk bid, right? Adding it once construction has started, all of a sudden is a change order of $1,000, $1,500, $3,000 because they're catching up on all the other stuff they missed. While I feel like adding that outlet in a demountable wall is the actual number of the demountable wall outlet plus the markup plus whatever, like the standard numbers. You get like very equal, reasonable numbers, I feel like. And so I think that the process of construction in general and utilizing some of this for demountables just makes it where you have to really look at, what your trades are, what you can control, what you can't control, where the client is going to be able to make the decisions early on or later, and kind of plan accordingly. So, sorry, just so much fun.
No, totally. We just added another person to our list. So we've got our designers, we've got our developers, now we've got our GCs, and then obviously we're all trying to create something great for our clients. So
yeah,
I think this was a really awesome conversation. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining us today. And I would just like to say thanks for listening to the Tell Me More podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating episode of Tell Me More. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of design and innovation. If you're hungry for more insights and stories, make sure to subscribe to Tell Me More on your preferred podcast platform. As we sign off, remember that the conversation doesn't end here. Connect with us on social media at Allsteel and share your thoughts, questions, or even your favorite moments from the podcast. We love hearing from our engaged and curious audience. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll continue exploring the design to do more philosophy. Until then, thanks for listening.